I was a scared kid, and I was a shy kid in my own way. It took me a long time to have enough pride to be able to stand up and say, this is what I believe in. So much of audiology didn't jibe with my essence, and this does. This feels right.
Although our story has been long and sad, there's hope, and Dr. Ray has brought that hope to us.
I always knew it was a struggle for Michael socially, and I was okay with him living what I felt was going to be his best life.
I don't know if I had totally made like a life expectation for Cameron by the second or third grade, because we had been dealing with hearing issues with Cameron since he was a toddler. My expectation was that he was never going to be able to handle environmental sounds like an average person.
By the time parents find me, they typically have gone looking all over tarnation, and someone just tells them to head my way because they've looked everywhere else.
I just remember being afraid that, what if she doesn't ever read and write?
Before we started working with Dr. Ray, I would visualize her future as very difficult, just interacting with people and functioning day to day with her biggest thing, aside from the speech, was noises. Noises were so hard for her.
I've seen so many improvements in these kids' function. I've seen kids jumping 4 and 5 years of reading in a year. I've seen decreases in fatigue and anxiety. Catch them early enough, help them change their direction so that they can function, instead of waiting and reacting when they've already fallen behind. I was a sensitive child. When I was a kid, everything was too loud. It was too hot, too intense, too fast. Clothing had to be stretchy for me and a size too big. Textures couldn't be mixed together in my food. I often couldn't tell where sounds were coming from well enough to know what to listen to and what to ignore. To add to my trouble with sound and touch, I also had poor balance and proprioception, which meant I didn't know where my body was in space. And because I was incredibly tentative about taking physical risks, I rarely hurt myself. But I also wasn't willing to try anything new. In school, I struggled with making friends. I kept poor eye contact. Lunch boxes were left full of food and ants, and library and textbooks lost. In 1 year, I lost 27 textbooks. When my parents brought me for testing, I was 7 years old, and they labeled me as gifted but with attention deficit disorder. As an adult, and as a medical professional, when I look back, I don't think stimulant should have been the first treatment they offered me. No, I think instead they should have thought about my difficulties with sensory processing, but nobody really thought about that back then. Had it been now, there's really no telling what label they would have given me or what treatment they would have forced upon me. My hearing was normal. I passed every test. I could hear beeps just fine. And in quiet, I could understand speech. But in noisy places, I often felt as if I were drowning in the sound around me. I could barely understand the people that surrounded me. It all seemed to blur together, and I would float, dizzy, uncomfortable, and tired. So tired. And after a short while, I'd usually set out to escape to a bedroom or a bathroom. Really, anywhere the noise wasn't. To make it worse, if there were other senses involved, like strobe lights affecting my vision, or tight clothing, or tags, or even the physical need for food or relief, my ability to tolerate sound worsened further. It was almost as if I were a computer, and I only had so much memory, space for RAM. Every sensory annoyance was like spyware, and it was just eating up my storage capacity. It seemed like the only times I enjoyed going out, to dance clubs or even hanging out in a crowded restaurant with my friends when somebody was using visual language. It was only then that I could ignore my environment enough to maintain an inner calm. Having grown up around deaf and hard of hearing children, watching signing and cueing in my classes, in my social life, sometimes I wished I had the ability to just turn down the volume of the background noise, to turn it down. I was drowning. If I could turn it down, I could pick out the voices I wanted to hear. Sometimes, though, I just couldn't bear any more stimulation, and I longed, at least temporarily, to escape sound entirely. But when I was a kid, escape from sound overwhelm just wasn't an option. It wasn't until I was an adult, already having worked as an audiologist for many, many years, that I finally puzzled out a possible solution to the dilemma of allowing people with sensory processing difficulties to hear clearly in a variety of environments but not be overwhelmed by sound. It drew upon my history as a sensitive child and young adult, learning how to manage the combination of my visual spatial learning style and sensory processing difficulties, as well as my years of carefully programming hearing aids for my patients with hearing loss. But rather than focusing upon the technical details of how one goes about programming hearing aids for children and adults who can hear but cannot tolerate and understand sound, I would far prefer to tell some of the stories of language gained, of confidence built, and of hope renewed. But these aren't my stories to tell. Instead, I'd like to introduce you to the true protagonists, the children and adults who have experienced auditory sensitivity and processing disorders, and then had the opportunity to live their lives with the ability to directly control their own sense of hearing through technology and expert programming.
Versus with the simulation. Can you tell the difference? Okay, take those out entirely and see the difference you hear in the room. Okay, so this is more overwhelming. What about if I hide my mouth so you can't see me, like as if I were wearing a mask? How would you do then?
Then I'm just looking at your chin to attempt to hear you.
I suppose that makes it harder, doesn't it?
My grandfather Jack was hard of hearing, and it had gotten progressively worse and worse when I was very young, to the point where you had to be talking to him directly. You had to be looking him right in the eyes for him to be able to lip read a bit. And I think it made a lot of sense when I went to school that I was far more interested in the children with hearing loss.
I was born with a brain hemorrhage, and that always was a thing. Well, I always knew that and could tell that I wasn't like the other kids from, 6 years old, first grade, with speed, with noise, with, everything that makes first grade what it is. In fourth grade, you normally know all your addition by then, but I didn't and still don't. That's not a normal thing, and then when that's not a normal thing, teachers, they don't know what to do or how to react, and then when they do react, it can, show the bad side of teachers, I guess. And that happened, I don't even know, in 6th grade, I don't even know what happened. The lunchroom, the noise, the hallways. And then, people making friends, joining groups that I couldn't be a part of.
She is an incredibly happy-go-lucky, joyful child and has been since the day she was born. And I didn't know how hard it was, but as soon as we were in contact with someone who knew, Dr. Ray, then and we took her off, and we actually cried because it was sad to see how stressful life is for her. But then we also were kind of jumping up and down and happy because we finally found out what is going on. Like, why is it so stressful for her? And then Dr. Ray said that we could do a hearing aid trial, a low gain hearing aid trial. She was willing to work with me, and she said, I think I have some ideas about what's going on with her, that I could probably help her, and I can do testing for her, even online. Like, everything I do is online. So even though we were in a complete, literally global shutdown, Dr. Ray was able to reach us and to help us. And so she gave her, the testing. And in the middle of the testing, she texted me and said, make her stop. This is so stressful. Make her stop. And my heart just broke because I was like, not only are we getting answers, but the person who's giving me the answers understands what she's going through and is saying, we're going to make it stop. We're going to make her pain and her suffering and her sadness and her overwhelmness, we're going to make it stop. And it was just the most amazing moment for us.
My parents sent me to a public school that wasn't my typical public school, and it had a deaf mainstream program. And about 10% of the kids in my school were deaf or hard of hearing, most of them deaf. So they weren't able to really communicate without hearing aids. They weren't really able to use their voices very much. And we had interpreters in every class. And we had this amazing music teacher. Her name was Terry Burdett. And she started a singing group called the Fabulous Flying Fingers. So the deaf kids would be put on like a wooden platform so they could feel the rhythm of the songs. And we were taught to sign all the songs, walking in a winter wonderland or something like that, And we would go touring different places because there weren't any other signing groups. One of the places we went was to the Kennedy Center. And my father and I did a duet of Somewhere Out There in front of President Reagan. And I could have touched him. I was that close, which was really quite cool. So my grandfather really was my very first introduction to the concept that not everybody could hear the same way. And I think it absolutely fueled some of my interest in hearing loss.
My name is Lauren Maroney. My son is Michael. He's 11 currently and has been diagnosed with ADHD, APD, and dyslexia, as well as a global processing disorder. Michael was diagnosed prior to the pandemic, right before, and I was unwilling to bring him into an office due to other health concerns in the family. After a quick search, I came across a group that was astronomically recommending Dr. Ray, and the testimonials were overwhelming. And she offered a trial of the aids, which is something that I had never heard of. My son was having a lot of issues as far as concentration, staying on task, fidgeting, being able to follow directions. Multi-step directions were impossible. His reading was way below grade level, like grade levels below. He viewed other students as being able to do when he could not. He found it hard to make friends. So while trialing the aids, my son, that has such poor executive functioning, was making sure that these aids were on the charger every night. Before he even got out of bed, he put them in himself. He decided, I like these. I want to continue to use them. It has allowed him to socially interact in a way that I had never seen before. He doesn't have to look at my mouth or other people's mouths when they're speaking. He is reading 2 grade levels higher than what he was, and we just started less than a year ago. I'm someone that has struggled for such a long time to find something that would help my son. And I felt like I was hitting dead end after dead end. So after finding the aids and finding Dr. Ray, I thought, I need to shout this from the rooftops. I cannot sit back quietly and allow another family to go through what we've gone through, and just the never-ending search and the never-ending struggle.
The most common things I see are reduced anxiety, less fatigue, less emotional instability or meltdowns, increases in terms of understanding of multiple part instructions, benefits in memory, improvements in articulation, and actually really big increases very often in reading and writing because of better understanding of phonology, which is the sounds in speech.
Matthew wants to become an astronaut. And I've always said he can be whatever he wants to. Oh my goodness. Since the hearing aids and the progress he's made, it's definitely more of a possibility that he can be whatever he wants to be. There's more truth to that. He might not play rugby, which is okay, but he's playing tennis, and he's very resilient. He works so hard in his speech and at school and at home that he's going to go places. Well, both of them will be going places. Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
My grandfather started losing his hearing in his 40s or 50s, but the technology was dreadful. I mean, it was analog, and it was noisy, and it whistled, and it had a lot of background sound in it. I think if he had had access to the kind of technologies we do now, he never would have felt that level of separation that he did, even with them on. It wasn't enough. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't enough. But what we have now, I'm sure in the future we'll have something so much better that we'll say, well, it wasn't enough, but it was something. But it's really quite good at this point. It's good enough at this point that we have children who make up 4 and 5 years of capability and achievement within a very short time. So it's enough that we should at least be trying it earlier, catch them early enough, help them change their direction so that they can function, instead of waiting and reacting when they've already fallen behind.